So on today's episode of the Health Collective podcast, we're talking with Dr. Aruna, a board-certified adult geriatric and holistic psychiatrist and founder of Trilogy Health in Wisconsin, all about the increase in toxicity in our society when it comes to our diet, to our cosmetics, to pretty much all of the products that we use today. Now, Dr. Aruna, with the realization that conventional psychiatry is a linear, medication-dependent and symptoms-based model with little to offer the millions of people struggling with mental illness, she turned to functional medicine and Ayurveda to create a new paradigm of holistic mental wellness. Now, Dr. Aruna has a long history of health conditions herself, and she learned through very holistic approaches how to handle those and move away from the traditional 100% medication. In today's episode, some of the key points that stood out for me is that we really discussed areas that maybe you would never really think of in terms of toxicity to the body. We look at sexual revolution and how certain types of sexual contraceptives, how these aspects of life actually increase massive amounts of toxicity in the body. We look at the endocrine system and how weight gain is so severely linked to our mental health and in terms of our trauma, and not just our diet, but also the kind of products that we're putting on and in our body. We look at quite a few controversial aspects of today's society as well. And Dr. Aruna is a big believer that women can't have it all. This is a paradigm and an actual anachronism that has been created in society by men for the benefit of men, but actually it puts so much pressure on women that we're unable to heal our bodies in holistic ways. So we cover a really wide array of topics, and we finish up by looking at what is it or what does it mean to really heal our bodies from the aspect of diet, mental stability, emotional stability, as well as prioritizing our choices. What we want to be doing is making sure that any decision we make is ours and not influenced by cultural or societal norms. So this is quite an extended episode because we really get into a lot of controversial topics that we may be following up on in a secondary episode going forward. If you yourself are struggling with hormonal imbalance or weight gain or overwhelm or exhaustion or any part of your health that isn't in tune with where you'd like it to be, then please reach out to us at thehealthandfitnesscoach.com or shoot us an email to rita@thehealthandfitnesscoach.co.uk. We work specifically with women over the age of 40 looking to lose weight, create time, create self-care and look after themselves now that they are short on time because they're full-time mums, full-time business owners, and have a to-do list as long as their arms. So again, if you need help in your own health, weight, or body shape, reach out to us at thehealthandfitnesscoach.com or follow us on socials. All of the details will be in the podcast description. So without further ado, let's join Dr. Aruna and myself and listen to today's episode. Enjoy. Welcome to everyone listening, and a massive welcome to Dr. Aruna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure, Rita.
Fantastic. So today what we're really focusing on is mental health and mental illness and different ways of handling and healing those areas of health in more holistic sort of manners. Now, what I'd love for you to do is, first of all, share with the audience why this is such an important aspect for you, because you have said yourself that in terms of your own cognitive dissonance, you used to prescribe a lot of medication in this area. So what led you into this more holistic way of approaching mental health?
So I don't think there was any one instance. It was just, I really, if I look back as to how my life unfolded, it was really becoming self-aware and following the crumbs that the universe was laying down in front of me. So, to begin with, I was actually quite sick as a person. I was very ill with a lot of chronic diseases. I had developed PCOS by the time I was polycystic ovarian syndrome, by the time I was 14 or 15. Then I had symptoms of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which I knew, even as a medical student, I knew that I was having it. But because my tests were abnormal, nobody would do anything about it. For my PCOS, when I was reading the books, I had no clue as to how to treat that. And then then my labs did become positive for Hashimoto's. I struggled with what was called, I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. There's a little bit of trauma in my life, which I was not aware of. And then I struggled with infertility. Then I was developing symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. It was one thing after another. And I was just going from one pill to the next. And I was doing the same for my patients. But then when I was trying to get pregnant, and luckily a patient brought in a National Geography magazine that had compared the levels of toxins in American adult women, men, and children, and compared them with the blood levels of the same toxins in their European counterparts. And the hypothesis was that there was a significant difference. There were so many toxins that were found even in newborn cord blood in the Americans, but not so much in the Europeans. And I'm talking about early 2000 is when I read this article. And what I found is that the hypothesis was that these toxins maybe was contributing to the explosion of chronic disease in the US as opposed to in the Europe. And this made me really question what I was eating, what cosmetics I was using. I really wanted to, especially with all my, at that point, I thought, oh, this is genetic destiny. And I don't want to start my children with so much of baggage. So at least let me clean up my environment. And then when I stopped eating at the hospital cafeteria. That was one of the first things. And then I was like, one day I had forgotten to take my lunch and I was pregnant with my second child. And I went into the cafeteria, looked at everything that was offered, and then I walked out. Because it just wasn't, at that point in time, from everything that I was reading about the toxicity in our commercial food system, that was not good for me. And then the natural question was, if it's not good for me and my baby, how is this good for patients that I'm treating here in this hospital? How is the food that they're eating impacting their mental health? And that led me, I asked Dr. Google, and I found a study that was looking at giving not even high dose, actually 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids to a group of patients. They actually took a group of people, 80 people, 40 of them got the placebo, 40 of them got high dose fish oil. And this group of 80 people were at high risk for developing psychosis. So these people were someone that had what is called as soft neurological signs. They had some mild abnormalities in their body and in their nervous system. But most importantly, they had a first-degree relative with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder. So they were considered at higher risk to develop psychosis in their lifetime. And what they found is that the group that got fish oil for just 12 weeks, their risk of psychosis at the end of those 12 weeks, at the end of 1 year, and at the end of 5 years was significantly reduced as opposed to the group that got the placebo. And even though they took it only for 12 weeks, that benefit lasted for up to 5 years. I was blown away. If there was a medication that did this, that would become a pharma blockbuster. So I was like, wow, all I had to do was give, and this was a single intervention, right? And because my mind had suddenly found something that's so tangible and it was so cheap, as opposed to hundreds of dollars for any antipsychotic. If you didn't have insurance, patients had to pay $300, $400 per month. And so the comparison was just, there was no comparison. But because this had opened my mind, and then I found when I went to my last American Psychiatric Association conference in May of 2013, seriously, I've not been to any psychiatry conference after that. But in that conference, what happened was that I was introduced to integrative psychiatry. And then from there, I Googled that term and I found that there was this organization called American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine. My first conference with them was in October of 2013, and I haven't looked back. Now, in this conference, these were a group of people from, they were endocrinologists, internal medicine, psychiatrists, functional medicine doctors, Ayurvedic doctors. They were providing a new framework as to how to conceptualize disease. It's not that there is a genetic defect or the body is broken, but it is that chronic disease results from a breakdown in our physiology. So it's a metabolic breakdown, whether it is mental or physical disease. And all we had to do was figure out where this physiological breakdown was, what caused it, and then fix it. So really the two big questions was, what is this person having that is toxic to them, and what is their need that is not being met? Two simple questions, two simple answers. And I was blown away with some of the studies and testimonials that these very amazing physicians were presenting. And then I originally come from India. I had heard about Ayurveda, but I had grown up, under British colonial rule, everything that was indigenous to the Indian culture was suppressed, and Ayurveda was one among them. So I grew up literally thinking that Ayurveda was unfounded science. It was grandmother's tales. There was no evidence to that. But in this conference, I was learning about evidence for Ayurveda, not only at the physiological level, pharmacological level, clinical level, but also at the level of the genes, in the way they were conceptualizing constitution and personality types and all that. So then I decided to follow functional medicine and Ayurveda. I got trained in this. I got my diploma in integrative and holistic medicine. And once, Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And really, once you learn all this information, there was no going back for me. I could not prescribe a psychiatric medication without first looking for the root causes. And mental illness is really there. It's not just a brain disease, and there is no chemical imbalance. In fact, a group of psychiatrists from actually UK, Joanna Moncrief, she's actually a really amazing psychiatrist who's been raising the alarm of the dangers of psychiatric medications for at least 2 decades. And last year, she published yet another huge meta-analysis. They looked at all the studies that was published in regard to depression and the serotonin imbalance theory over the last 70 years. And they did not find even a single study that supported this hypothesis. But if you ask anybody, hey, what causes depression? Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. It's a genetic disease. This is how much of propaganda has been done to really, create a fog around what are the real root causes for disease. So when I started it was in 2013 to 2015 is my information. Was big in learning and education for myself. And then in 2016 is when I felt confident to quit my job because they were not at all open to any of the ideas that I had. And so I had to start my own practice, but that gave me the opportunity to truly innovate. And there were really nothing existed for especially psychiatry. Functional medicine existed. They were doing a lot of good work for other chronic medical illnesses, but not so much for psychiatry. And so, but that really gave me a wonderful opportunity to carve something new. And over again, I began to see that it was bad diet, trauma, both physical as well as early life psychological trauma, and toxins. These were the 3 main root causes. And the way they impact the body is that they cause inflammation beginning in the gut. And then from there, it can affect the immune system even further. It can affect your hormone. It can affect your endocrine system. So as I began to look for these root causes, I began to see that, I had a patient with who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She had 2 hospitalizations, 7 different psychiatrists, but really what she had was Hashimoto's thyroiditis that was manifesting as a psychotic illness. You treat the thyroid and the immune condition. She's been free of medications for the last 3 years, and she's doing really well. So many of these, situations and cases, and it really became very fun and very gratifying to see that I was able to reverse what was considered a chronic mental illness, irreversible mental illness. That was a long monologue.
So you mentioned there sort of 3 keys, which are usually at the foundation of any sort of mental disease. And you mentioned the diet, toxins, and hormone. So our audience is probably very familiar with the diet and the trauma. We've spoken quite a lot about how emotional trauma can manifest itself. And we also speak quite a lot about the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve, and sort of how food has quite a big impact on our mental and emotional state. But the word that maybe was less familiar with our audience is toxins. Now, most people think of toxins as poison, and a lot of people who listen to me know that I refer to even things like alcohol as a toxin, things like refined sugar. But what do you mean when you talk about toxins and their impact on mental health?
So really, we sadly, and I know that this is more so in the Americas as well as in the developing nations, but UK up until now has been very protective of its citizenry. I don't know how long that is going to last, but so this was, and even the National Geography magazine, that's what it pointed out. So the toxins are what's there in your toothpaste, what's there in your shampoos, in your body wash, and especially for us women, all the cosmetics that we wear. And then also your laundry detergent. And I was in India just a few months ago, and big billboards advertising these detergents with 5 times the fragrance, Nivea body cream with 5 times the fragrance. Anytime you hear the word fragrance or perfume, they are endocrine disruptors. They're primarily phthalates, but they could also be parabens. They're xenoestrogens, meaning foreign estrogens. And they are linked not only with mental illness, because hormones play a huge component in how we feel and how our energy is and how we assess the world. Even if you're low in estrogen, you're going to feel very sensitive to criticism. That, there are studies that show that. But not only that, but these toxins, they cause ovarian cancer, breast cancer, they cause testicular cancer, they cause chronic inflammation. And then another big, so it's in the food that we eat. So pesticides, genetically modified food is actually highly toxic. And GMO, especially in the US, it's GMO corn, GMO soybean, the seed oils that are used in any restaurant, they're not making it with butter or ghee. They're using either Crisco, which is hydrogenated fats, or they're using seed oils like canola, corn, soybean oil, highly inflammatory. And then so it's through food, it's in our water, fluoride in our water, fluoride in our toothpaste, and then in our home environment, like here in the carpet, if you have carpet in your house, the flame retardants, they're all neurotoxins. Your furniture, your pillowcases, your sheets, it's endless, really. There's so much of, and fragrance, anything. I mean, that's why I switched over to shampoo bars and conditioners, because to make the shampoo and the conditioner flow and have that shiny look, they add all these toxins. And then, of course, preservatives in our food, anything that is artificial dye. These studies actually were done in the 70s. They clearly showed that presence of artificial dyes and artificial flavors, even natural flavors, even though it says natural flavors, it's a very chemical intensive process, and those chemicals don't go anywhere. And all of these things, especially dyes, have been linked to ADD in attention deficit in boys and anxiety in girls. These studies were done in the 70s, but still in the US, especially, whether it is McDonald's. So interesting fact, McDonald's and a company that makes these chocolates called Mars, they don't put dyes in their products when they serve their food in UK and in Europe, but they do that in the US. And then we see, 10%, 13% of children with ADHD. It's not a coincidence. Autism rates are going up. We are in a toxic cesspool. That's what's happening. Literally from the time, and another big contributor of toxins is modern pharmaceuticals. From birth control pills, which actually destroy mineral absorption in the women. Then, of course, they interfere with our innate hormonal symphony that is happening. And they actually have been linked with both anxiety and depression. But other medications like the Tylenol, I don't know if your listeners know, Tylenol use around the time of birth, both in the mom as well as in the newborn, in the perinatal period, has been associated with increased risk of autism. Tylenol is so commonplace. It's paracetamol. We use it for fever. Tylenol is safe in pregnancy. You can give it even to your newborn baby. It's not actually, because it causes an inflammatory cascade, because the liver is too immature to detox the body in a newborn baby. And sometimes that can be enough to push the baby into a neuroinflammatory syndrome, which is what autism is. So medications are antacids, acid reflux medications. They cause so many problems in the body, from dementia to depression to osteoporosis to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, mineral malabsorption, kidney disease, heart disease. But majority of adults in the US are taking an acid blocker. So sadly, we are we are floating in a cesspool of toxins.
It's interesting how you talk about the US specifically, and obviously in the UK, unfortunately, I don't know how much Brexit was advertised around your news channels, but obviously due to Brexit, we have left the European Union, so we aren't protected by the same laws that we were protected by under the various different acts and trade deals of the EU. So in the UK and Europe, I think people aren't quite aware of the number of laws that are actually protecting the citizens from these toxins and from these companies, essentially these chemicals through our bodies. What's your opinion on the fact that the US hasn't seemed to have caught up with these laws? Now, the way that the US appears to work is essentially it's capitalism first, health second. So what's your opinion on the legal status of how these toxins are spread throughout the US specifically?
So we do have the FDA, which is, there's a lot of corruption. Bottom line, the lobbying that happens in the US Senate and in the US Capitol is nothing but a form of legalized corruption. So laws are passed to not protect the citizens, but to protect the industry. So you have the pharma lobby. Look at a recent example, Ozempic. I don't know if you heard about this. It's called
Yes.
You are in the weight loss industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard of Ozempic. It is everywhere in the UK. I don't think people quite understand the side effects of it. They're just seeing the glossy headline, but we are very well aware.
And they had this, I think it was a Harvard physician or a Stanford physician, pediatrician pushing it for kids over the age of 12. And I will tell you, I have 2 daughters now. And when my older one was 11 years old, I wanted to take her to check her vitamin D. And because I've been able to put my Hashimoto's and all the conditions I mentioned earlier through diet and lifestyle, I've been able to reverse them. But I was worried about my kids developing some of these things. I wanted to take her for a blood work. But the pediatrician said, oh, no, vitamin D will not be covered. You'll have to pay out of pocket, which is so ridiculous. And vitamin D is so important for so many things. How many kids are breaking their bones just because they're jumping from a little bit of a height? There's an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency, which is linked to everything from hormonal imbalance to depression. But they don't want to test that because vitamin D is cheap and they don't make money. But my pediatrician said, oh, but we can get her a lipid panel because that is covered by insurance. Why are you checking for that? I mean, there's no need. Oh, because we want to rule out familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a genetic condition. And what is the treatment for familial hypercholesterolemia is put the kid on statins, and how did this become an accepted practice? Obviously, it's lobbying. It is the funding for much of the medical associations. All the funding, whether it's American Academy of Pediatrics or the American Psychiatric Association, all of that, they get all of this funding. And so with Ozempic, the point I was making is this pediatrician on 60 Minutes is talking about giving Ozempic, which is supposedly a lifelong medication, to children as young as 12. And your listeners may not know this, the same effect of Ozempic, you can have that when you have a protein and a fat-rich diet, especially, I'm not talking about the trans fats and all that. I'm talking about butter and clarified butter. They will create the same sense of satiety and actually make you feel happy. Ozempic is going to make you throw up and also make you feel full without giving you any of the satisfaction that can come when when all your cells are nutritionally replete with the nutrients that they need. So, but that is how does this happen? It is because of legalized corruption. So the law, FDA, and of course, EPA, both of them, atrazine, Roundup. And now there is so much more awareness of Roundup, especially, in California, there was this groundskeeper who developed Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they associated it to Roundup usage. And there's he was awarded the case against Bayer and Monsanto who make Roundup. But Roundup was still available in Europe as well. So sometimes the money influence of these corporations is huge. So we do need to say, you have to get money out of politics. You have to get money out of lawmakers. That they should be. And the only way that I see that happening is with us voting with our dollars or with our money. 10 years ago, when I went down this path, everything was expensive. It was so expensive to switch over to clean products and all that. And even the choice was limited. But now there is more awareness. There are more, of course, there's, even there that now plant-based meats have come up, right? That's all GMO soy and corn, and it's highly processed. But we do see more companies are rising up, and whether it is in the cosmetics industry or whether it is toothpaste and detergents, and in all of these, and of course, processed food, snacks and things like that, we do see companies making foods that are relatively much better. I am okay with consuming some of these products. And like I said, I've switched my cosmetics, my body kit, everything I've switched over to everything clean. But otherwise, even in fact, studies are showing that indoor air is more polluted sometimes than outdoor air because like carpets, if you have carpet in your house and if it's a newer carpet, for up to 10 years, carpets, if you get a fresh coat of paint, they off gas what is known as volatile organic compounds, which again are endocrine disruptors. And that ties in not only to mental health, but actually a lot of weight gain is because of endocrine disruption.
So it's interesting how you talk about various different aspects of where toxins are building up from. And probably most of the listeners are aware of different types of products, which might be less chemical sort of infused, more natural based products. But you mentioned something that sort of struck with me, which was birth control pills. Now, when it comes to something like a birth control pill, which for a lot of women is an essential part of their day-to-day, whether they're single, in a relationship, long-term married, how would you go about addressing toxins from places where you feel like there's no other option? Because even if you look at birth control in terms of you can have EPO injections, you can take tablets, there's the coil, even things like latex condoms, even that is highly chemically infused and it's still having a huge impact on our body. So when it comes to birth control, what would your advice be in terms of reducing toxicity?
So here's the thing, and I've looked at the birth control issue as a woman. When I was many years ago, I took birth control myself, partly because of my PCOS, that the recommendation was to take birth control. And every month I ended up with a migraine headache, which is also a very common side effect. So the way I have understood this whole issue is that it is, again, a fantastic propaganda by big pharma. Because if you look at what has happened, the whole sexual freedom revolution, they did not make a birth control for men. In fact, they tried even very recently, but the side effects were so horrible that all the men quit the treatment group. This happened just a few years ago. But when it comes to us women, it was couched as sexual freedom, and it was a part of feminism. But if you look at what has happened, the issue of birth control has actually played in to the advantage of men. It's actually very disadvantageous to women because it has increased our risk of STDs because birth controls don't protect against that. It has still not prevented unwanted pregnancies. It has increased the rate of single parenthood. So men are having more sex and are going somewhat scot-free and not having to take the responsibility of parenthood. So we need to go back to the drawing board and really understand what were the forces that were behind all of this. You will see this happen in almost, yes, I've become a little cynical, but I've not lost hope in humanity. I don't think, I used to be cynical. I will say that my faith in humanity has been restored for a number of reasons, but I have become an informed consumer of information that is given to me free of cost. If I'm not choosing to take that information, and if it's coming to me free of cost, then I'm assuming that I am the product, that I'm being sold, or my mind or my things are being sold somewhere. So I've become very careful about this. But in reality, the sexual freedom that has been couched as a right and a freedom for us women has actually come with a lot more downsides. We are seeing an increase in cervical cancer, again, linked to multiple sexual partners. Our women are actually more and more depressed now than they were before all of this. So the safety and security of having a partner, having a two-parent household, all of this, and single income, and having to juggle work and home and all of that, it really has not been a good bargain for us women. So we really need to think about that. And to answer if there is an alternative, I would say non-hormonal IUDs. So it could be a copper IUD and safe sex practices or abstinence. That to say, we don't, I mean, certain actions come with certain consequences. And if you're in a committed relationship and if you're done with having a family, the best thing would be either vasectomy or tubectomy.
Okay.
That's because there is no good alternative for my patients that are not done with their family. I recommend Daisy, DAYSY. It's a fertility tracker, so it follows the ovulation period, and it has been actually shown to be as effective as taking the pill. But for that, you need to have regular menstrual cycles, and you need to be diligent, and you need to abstain during that time. So those were some of the things that it does have, those kinds of downsides. But really, I would invite especially the women that are listening to this to really question at what cost has our sexual revolution and our sexual freedom. And I say the same thing. If you look at the clothing, I have 2 teenage girls, and I am shocked at the kind of clothes that are available for them. And is that for our benefit? When you're wearing shorts that are basically showing your gluteal fold, or is it for the men's gaze? Who's creating these kind of clothing? Right? It's not for us, but it is couched as body freedom. It's couched as sexual freedom, but we are not getting, how is that body positivity? Again, I'm not saying you have to be a prude, you have to cover everything up. That's not where I'm not asking people to go. No, but that there has to be a balance. And for young girls, even as young as 10 and preteens, for them to be wearing these literally very tight shorts with the gluteal fold, the fold under the buttocks, that being shown. I don't know for whose benefit that is. I really don't know. Tampons is another way we do get, because a lot of tampons are made with GMO cotton, which is loaded with glyphosate, which is a carcinogen. So if you're using a tampon, use organic tampons. I just thought about it.
It's amazing how we need to be aware of, and probably what I'd like to finish up on today is most likely there's a lot of women listening to this that say, all of that makes sense. I get it. But I have 3 kids. I have a full-time job. I have a household, a family, life, admin, all of these kind of things. And I do not have time to spend my days looking for the most organic or the most clean, or I don't have time to read every label. I don't have time to go and try and convince my husband to get a vasectomy. All of these things, because we know now that women, as you were talking about with the sexual revolution, we've had the feminist revolution, and now we want it all. Women want to be full-time mom, full-time business owner, full-time CEO, full-time wife, and we're trying to fit a lot of roles into 24 hours, as well as hopefully some sleep. But to those women listening who say, I get it, but I don't have time to go and in practice do all of these things that you're talking about, what would be your guidance or your advice or your response to that?
See, health is like mathematics. 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. What I mean by that is that the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis, starting with what we are eating, what cosmetics we are using, what products we are using, and how we are chunking our time, the rat race, the overstressed, having it all. The reality is we cannot have it all. And again, all of this, so much of it is propaganda. What it is to be a woman. That is, what I would, again, go down these rabbit holes, see where it takes you. What is it that culture told you that you needed to be? And what is it that you innately want to do? You have to go down these rabbit holes. There is no easy answer. And so with that 1 + 1 = 2 analogy, what I mean is that modern lifestyle is highly inflammatory. From the rat race, from trying to do it all, to the diet and the toxins that we are exposed to. It's inflammatory, it is degenerative, it will lead to disease. So if you're either paying upfront or you're paying at the back end, one way or the other. So it really is a mindset. And I really, looking at the cultural revolution, yes, the feminist revolution happened, but we are also seeing, from me, I mean, from a very spiritual perspective, I really see that everything that is happening as the rise of the divine feminine. And to be feminine is the one that having it all, being that go-getter at work, those are masculine energy principles. Not to say that you cannot. I mean, I run a business. I did have to, when I was fighting in the hospital, I had to bring all of that energy, that masculine energy, that go-getter attitude, and you can't stop me kind of attitude. And I was a woman fighting with all these men until I could fight no more and I quit my job. But at the same time, so there is a time and place for that, for masculine energy, but there is, because we all have it, we have masculine and we have feminine. And in fact, what I see is that there has been so much overemphasis on everybody becoming masculine. Like I remember a few years ago, CEO of a Yahoo company, Marissa, I forget her last name, she had a baby and literally 10 days later, she was at work and everybody was hailing it. I am like, that kid needs a therapist 20 years down the lane. Where is the mother-baby bonding? And she was hailed as this somebody balancing work life. And no, she's sacrificing the mental, emotional, physical well-being of that child by abandoning that child right there. Why? Because culture told her that she needs to be that go-getter, a woman in pants, run a company. For what? For money? I don't know. I mean, because that initial 1 year period is such a crucial mother-baby, father-baby bonding time. And the breastfeeding is so important, not only for the baby's health, but for the health of the microbiome. So there are so many of these things. Really, what has happened because of capitalism, because of industry taking over, not only our kitchens, but our culture, and most importantly, our mind. All these companies, especially the software companies, they are fighting for the real estate, which is our mind. It's our attention. That's what they're doing. So we really, now so many times that even my friends too, they say, oh, my kids, they're on the phone. No, you can't. They're getting that dopamine hit all the time with that constant scrolling. And that's going to take their interest. It's an addiction. We are creating social media addicts. We're creating cell phone addicts. And pretty soon we'll see a residential treatment where there'll be nature, everything cut out, and that'll become a business model. So we create the problems in our society, and then we come up with solutions. So I would invite all the women or men for that matter to really take stock as to what it is that are we just supposed to be born, go to school, go to get a job, make money, serve an overlord, and then do that until we retire or we die? Is that all there is? What is to life? Is there anything more to life than that? So these are all the larger questions that we are, and I do see that as a society, with everything that is happening in our society, especially now, from the farmer protests in the Netherlands, India, Sri Lanka to, there's a lot more awareness about all of this, and the genetically modified foods that are being thrust down our throats and people revolting against it, people going back to organic farming. Regenerative farming is becoming a big topic in the US, and I am so glad about that. Same in India. There's a wonderful women activist. Her name is Vandana Shiva. She's been talking about it for the last 20, 30 years, and she's talked a lot about regenerative farming and taking that power and sovereignty back into our hands as everyday citizens, as everyday farmers. So there's we really need to question about all of these things. But for anyone that is ready to make this transition, there's tons of information. And actually, once you are armed with information, the change is not that difficult. It starts with the kind of attitude that we have, right? So either you're paying your farmer or you're paying your pharmacist. And paying the farmer is very less expensive. It's a fun process. You don't have to suffer along the way. But when you are ending up having to pay your hospital or your pharmacist, look at what happened. Like even in the UK, we are seeing a surge in sudden deaths recently. And depression. In US, 2021, we clocked the highest number of opiate overdose deaths, 106,000 in 1 year. That's ridiculous. Nobody's happy with the way things are going. And so we really need to question that paradigm of having it all. Is that, again, if you look at depression studies, anxiety studies, and satisfaction, quality of life studies, that narrative of you can have it all is not working out for us women. And I think it's high time we talked about it.
So we'll leave today's episode on, and it sounds like we could continue and maybe do a second episode at some point down the line, about having all looks like. Because as I listen to you, a lot of what you say I agree with, absolutely, in terms of creating a culture of addiction, essentially, because we are so in need of instantaneous dopamine hits that, you know, we scroll on Facebook. If we order food from takeaway, we want it now. If we order a delivery, we want it now. So we are creating huge numbers of psychological issues for generations to come, although luckily the generations to come seem to be very aware of what's happening. So they seem to be creating their own revolution.
Yes, because they are the sickest generation. They are the sickest young generation in all of humanity.
And I would agree with that. I think the point that, and this is where I think maybe a second episode would be a good place for us to go, is that there will be women listening who say, well, I want to go back to work after 10 days, or I want to, you know, look after my child full time for 3-4 weeks, however long, and then I want to go back to my career. My career is a big point of definition for me. I enjoy my business. At which point, where do their needs fit in with what you were saying, which is the first year is so vital, and especially with breastfeeding, for instance, there's a lot of women who struggle with breastfeeding. I remember with my first, I persevered, and it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. And it was only through sheer bloody mindedness that I didn't turn to the bottle. But for a lot of women, breastfeeding is challenging in terms of psychologically, especially when the baby doesn't latch. So all of those aspects where they're going, yes, I understand that in an ideal world, I would breastfeed for a year or more. I'd take that time off. We'd be both financially stable enough for me to be able to do that. You know, the sun would shine, there'd be no cost of living crisis, and we'd all be happy. But in the world that we live in and the reality that we live in, that idealism can feel very far away for a lot of women.
Yes, and I apologize if, you know, the way I spoke is triggering for some. I mean, I apologize. I truly do, because my intention is not to definitely come off as holier than thou or anything like that. No, the only point I'm making is that this idea that we can have it all, that is a false narrative, is what I'm saying. That's a delusional narrative. We can't. So if you go back to work in 10 days, that is going to have an effect on your baby, not for the better. There is no question about that. Now, when it comes to breastfeeding, yes, I am aware that a lot of women struggle for one reason or the other. And in those situations, I think, I mean, with any situation in life, the thing is, as long as we are self-aware and we know that we did our best, then we need to have compassion for ourselves. That's the only way to lead it. I mean, I'll be the last person to sit in judgment of anyone or their choices. The only thing I'm questioning is that become aware of your own decision-making process. That's it. Because if you are making these decisions based on what culture has ingrained in you, then that's not going to, at some point, it's going to not, you are going to awaken and you're going to realize that, holy cow, this is not what I am or what I wanted to do. And my life has gone by. That's what I'm talking about. So really, I mean, as we're going into our adulthood, we need to question all of this. We absolutely need to question, who am I? And the only way to do that is through meditation and self-awareness. So I'm not at all coming from a place of judgment or this is the only right way. But what I'm saying is that become empowered and make decisions that sit right with you. And yes, there are many, I mean, for me, yeah, I mean, I struggled a little bit with breastfeeding with my second child. And it is hard. And then I was, back, and this was before my awakening days, I was given a couple of antibiotics during my second pregnancy. So my daughter was born with a fungal infection. I developed fungal mastitis, painful. And then the milk, I wasn't making as much milk as my first pregnancy, but I would, freeze it up for when I went back to work, but then had to throw it all out because it was fungal. So, I mean, yes, we go through these real pain. And I will tell you, I had taken so many, I was giving her an antifungal. I was lapping on antifungal on my breasts and nipples. Nothing worked. What worked was I finally, out of desperation, I asked Dr. Google, and somebody suggested that, hey, try a probiotic. So I took just a generic probiotic, high dose probiotic that I could find, opened up the capsule, made a paste with it, put it all over my baby's mouth and let her lap it up, put it even on her butt, because I knew if it's in the mouth, it's all the way in the gut. And I put it on my nipples, did that for 1 week, and everything cleared up. So so again, that was another aha moment for me. I didn't have to take an antifungal with all its side effects. And, every time I was giving that antifungal, I would pray, let my baby's liver be okay. And, it was, yes, it is hard, but we do need support. And we do, again, I'm probably yearning for those simple, good old times. Then there never was a good old time, it's just, but the rat race that we are going into, I don't think that is healthy for any one of us. And it's not just what I am thinking, it's what we are seeing as evidence. We are seeing more asthma, more allergies, more eczema, more ADD, and more anxiety, and more depression, more gut issues. So many weird syndromes are coming up, affecting our children. And then who is bearing the brunt of it? It's the parents, because we have to take, So all I'm saying is that this narrative that you can have it all is a false narrative. So you go deep within yourself and make the decisions that work for you, your family, your situation, your life circumstance, and then hold compassion for yourself, because you're doing the best that you can.
Self-compassion is key. And I think the biggest takeaway from today is, if you are making a decision, ensure that it's your decision and not a reaction to a cultural norm. And don't allow large companies, and for those listening, please be aware that anyone advertising at you has a panel of board certified psychologists and behavior change experts on their panel who understand how to psychologically influence you to buy their product. So make sure that if you make any decision, it's yours and not somebody else's. So thank you so much, Dr. Aruna, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And like I said, we could probably go on and on and on, but for the constraints of time, we must leave it there. So thank you to everybody for listening and for giving us your time. And thank you so much to Dr. Aruna as well.
Yes, I just want to have this parting thing. I know we talked about a lot of things that's how the conversation evolved. But I do want to let all your listeners know that it's not all doom and gloom. Actually, it is very much possible to live a life of our choosing, to live a life of empowerment, to live a life full of energy, joy, and vitality. It is very to achieve that. It's not hard. And I have personally witnessed that there is a shift happening in the larger consciousness, and it is happening for the better, for all of our upliftment. There's a lot of abundance in the universe. I don't want anyone to live in fear. That's the parting message to everyone that's listening here. There is nothing to fear, and there's so much to feel abundant about, to feel blessed, and to be in love with. So that's my parting message.
Live from a place of love, not from a place of fear. What a fantastic parting message to finish on. So thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to Dr. Aruna, and I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode.